Tom Joad just finished serving 4 years in McAllister Prison, the state penitentiary in Oklahoma, for killing a man in self-defense. He's finally going home to his childhood farm in Oklahoma. However, he will not find his family there. Their farm, hit by the severe dust storms that buried the American prairie in the 1930s, has been repossessed by the bank. Without any other option, Tom joins his family on Route 66, crowded with other desperate migrants carrying their worldly possessions on their backs westward toward California. This is the backdrop of the late John Steinbeck's award-winning novel, the enduring American classic, The Grapes of Wrath. Steinbeck is one of the most celebrated American authors of all time. Over the course of his career, he wrote some 33 books, including Of Mice and Men, East of Eden, and his magnum opus, The Grapes of Wrath. His books are not just a critical part of the American literary canon, but they are intrinsic to American identity itself. With every ordinary and deeply relatable protagonist, Steinbeck was able to capture the realities of this nation. The Grapes of Wrath was inspired by a series of articles written by Steinbeck in 1936 for the San Francisco News about the plight of migrant farm workers in California. When it was published in book form 3 years later, in 1939, it was a sensation. It was a bestseller. It was debated. It was banned and burned. It was contested. It was celebrated, and it was discussed across the country, and it still is. The Grapes of Wrath is a masterclass in storytelling. Told in Steinbeck's trademark empathetic, colloquial, and observational style, The Grapes of Wrath is a story of strength, of suffering, of family injustice, of humanity. It's a story of hope. The book is divided between chapters that tell us the Joad family story and others that tell us about their world. Steinbeck's literary depiction of the Joads is both urgent and lyrical, as though he wrote it in one single draft, with the animal imagery, the religious references, the character complexity, and the sensory adjectives perfectly executed. The interval chapters are dark and sorrowful vignettes. They're some of the most intensely emotional of the entire novel. The Grapes of Wrath begins with one such vignette describing the land of Oklahoma choked by dust. Quote, "The dawn came, but no day. In the gray sky, a red sun appeared, a dim red circle that gave a little light like dusk. And as the day advanced, the dusk slipped back toward darkness, and the wind cried and whimpered over the fallen corn. Men and women huddled in their houses, and they tied handkerchiefs over their noses when they went out and wore goggles to protect their eyes. When the night came again, it was black night, for the stars could not pierce the dust to get down, and the window lights could not even spread beyond their own yards." End quote. When the Joads finally reached California, the so-called Promised Land, the interval chapters shift in tone. They become more indignant, more direct, and more passionate. Steinbeck's message is clear. Quote, "There is a crime here that goes beyond denunciation. There is a sorrow here that weeping cannot symbolize. There is a failure here that topples all of our success. The fertile earth, the straight tree rose, the sturdy trunks, and the ripe fruit, and children dying of pellagra must die because a profit cannot be taken from an orange. And coroners must fill in the certificate, died of malnutrition, because the food must rot, must be forced to rot." End quote. There are some novels that we've covered on the Velshi Band Book Club that feel prescient, works like those of Margaret Atwood or Octavia Butler, for example. But The Grapes of Wrath is not one of those novels. It's not telling us what might become of our country and our fellow Americans and our land. It's telling us what's already here, what's already happening. In the 85 years, the decade since the Dust Bowl, since the Great Depression, since the publication of this book, not enough has changed. Americans still face inescapable ecological disasters and discrimination and poverty and a breakdown of community. And yet still, we're the people. We're the people that live, and we will go on. After a quick break, I'll be joined by two guests incredibly suited to discuss The Grapes of Wrath. The author, Emily Danforth, a member of the Velshi Band Book Club, who's been inspired by John Steinbeck's work, and Bruce Robbins, a literary scholar and author and professor at Columbia University. Today's meeting of the Velshiband Book Club is officially underway. We are discussing a novel that is synonymous with American culture and literary identity. A winner of the National Book Award, the Pulitzer Prize, and the Nobel Prize in Literature, The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. Here to discuss it with me, Emily Danforth. You will, of course, remember her. She is a member of the Velshiband Book Club. She is the author of the famous Miseducation of Cameron Post. She's been inspired by John Steinbeck. And Bruce Robbins, who is a literary scholar, an author, and a professor of humanities at Columbia University. Welcome to both of you. Thank you both for being with us for this important discussion that we're so excited about. Emily, welcome back. Let me start with you. Arguably the most recognizable passage in the novel is the moment when the protagonist, Tom Joad, says goodbye to his mother after Jim Casey dies, and he knows he must leave. Quote, "Wherever there is a fight so hungry people can eat, I'll be there. Wherever there is a cop beating up a guy, I'll be there. I'll be in the way guys yell when they're mad. I'll be in the way kids laugh when they're hungry and they know their supper's ready. And when our folks eat the stuff they raise and live in the houses they build, why, I'll be there," end quote. This quote encompasses many of the key themes in The Grapes of Wrath. Tell me more about this.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me back. It's good to be here. I think that quote gets at the dignity and shared humanity in solidarity and collective action. It also does, in one quote, sort of the thing that the novel does so brilliantly across all its pages, which it gives us the character of Tom Joad at the microscopic level, while at the macroscopic level, giving us these larger themes that the novel gives us back and forth with its alternating chapters. And so in that one quote, you've sort of encapsulated everything that occurs over the pages. Yeah.
It's marvelous in the way those chapters sort of change character. Bruce, I want to read from chapter 14, which is not only powerful, but particularly relevant to today's reader. Pa borrowed money from the bank, and now the bank wants the land. The land company, that's the bank, when it has the land, wants tractors, not families on the land. One man, one family driven from the land, this rusty car creaking along the highway to the west. I lost my land. A single tractor took my land. I am alone and bewildered, and in the night, one family camps in a ditch and another family pulls in, and the tents come out. The two men squat on their hams, and the women and children listen. Here's the node. You who hate change and fear revolution, keep these two squatting men apart. Make them hate, fear, suspect one another. Here is the analogy of the thing you fear. This is the zygote. For here, I lost my land is... hang on a second, changed. A cell is split, and from its splitting grows the thing you hate. We lost our land. That's the end of the quote. I find this very interesting because it is this idea that we still do. We did this, by the way, before 1939. We did it during the Second World War. We still continue to do this. We drive people to think that they are individuals suffering, not collectively.
One of the things that make this a classic, as you say, is that it's about a moment in American history, but it's not just about that moment in American history. It's about an experience that has continued happening and happening and happening. And it's the experience of eviction and dispossession. It's also, I think, applicable to experience today in ways we might not immediately have thought of, like the situation of other migrant workers, other refugees around the world. I mean, it's a classic in that sense. It keeps generating new meanings. You know, I mean, it talks about the things that are clearly there, and then suddenly you say, oh my God, it's about more than that. Absolutely. I'll just add one little thing. I mean, you could very easily think Tom Joad is the hero of this and it's going to be Tom Joad's story. I think Ma Joad is actually more central to it than her son is. I mean, and she's got some great philosophical, but she's also the force that keeps the family going and keeps the family together. Sorry.
No, I'm glad you said that, because I want to ask Emily about Ma Joad in particular and her place at the very center of the Joad family. I'm going to read a quote from the book. She seemed to know, to accept, to welcome her position, the citadel of the family, the strong place that could not be taken. Imperturbability could be depended upon. And from her great and humble position in the family, she had taken dignity and a clean, calm beauty. From her position as healer, her hands had grown sure and cool and quiet. From her position as arbiter, she had become as remote and faultless in judgment as a goddess. She seemed to know that if she swayed from the family, she swayed and the family shook. And if she ever really deeply wavered or despaired, the family would fall. The family will to function would be gone. Tell me more about this.
Well, and of course, over the course of the novel, the family is not just the Joads, right? The family begins as the Joads, and then the family becomes the collective. And so Ma Joad saying that if she wavered, the family would falter. She is the symbol of hope for me as well when I read the novel. And when I think of my first time reading it in high school, the memories that still resonate for me, you know, too many years later, are Ma Joad in the kitchen frying up dough. It's Ma Joad having conversations with Rose of Sharon, and being that sort of dignity, that symbol of hope in the face of such adversity and such dehumanization. It always goes back to Ma for me.
Bruce, you have a forthcoming book. It's called Atrocity, a Literary History, in which it explores the literature of suffering. As Emily just said, and you have pointed out, Grapes of Wrath is not about a single family's struggle. It's about systemic poverty. It's about discrimination, as you said, eviction, displacement, and ecological disaster. You and I discussed in the break before we started, it's not like Margaret Atwood in that it was prescient. It wasn't happening at the time, and now what Margaret Atwood wrote about is happening. This was happening then and continues to happen now, and yet there are people who would prefer that their children do not read this book in school.
Yeah, it's hard for me to get my head around. I mean, there are obviously people who object to the what they called at the time socialism, which is more like collective action. I think, yeah, we said it. And some of the most incredibly moving things, I can't imagine anybody objecting to this. The theme of the poor helping the poor. This is for those who've got to the last scene. It's one of the strongest scenes, I think, in all of American literature. But when I think of Ma Joad, I think of her trying to make a family meal with almost nothing, and then seeing the kids who are not from her family sitting around and not being able not to share it with them. She knows it's nothing, but she has to share it.
What an interesting message. We're about to be at Martin Luther King Day, and at the time of his death, he was making that point, that if they stopped driving us apart, we'd actually be able to fix these things because we're all suffering from the same stuff. Emily, in The Miseducation of Cameron Post, your remarkable book, the land almost functions as a secondary character. The same can be said of The Grapes of Wrath, by the way. Talk to me about the significance of land in The Grapes of Wrath. Ma Joad, Tom Joad, they talk a lot about the land. This is a story about land and people.
Certainly, and the passage you began with, the dust. You feel how the land has been choked, how nothing can grow there. That drives why they have to leave, right? Why they become migrants, and then the land is such a character when they get to the sort of lushness of California and they see the golden citrus that they then cannot touch, that cannot be eaten. The other passage that you share, the land becomes such a character in the novel, and again, it's that sort of placement between the Joads as the family that we're following, and then this larger sort of sense of the land that they're working, the land that's working against them. And then the passages are so lyrical and evocative.
This needs to be a 3-hour Velshi Band Book Club. It is fantastic. There's so much in this book, and you two are so wonderful. Thank you for doing this for us. The Velshi Band Book Club member, Emily Danforth, is the author of the books The Miseducation of Cameron Post and Plain Bad Harold. Robbins is a humanities professor at Columbia University, a literary scholar, author of numerous books, including the forthcoming Atrocity, a Literary History, which we'll have to have you on to talk about. Thanks to both of you.